What is up? It's Alex from Metronome Music, and today we're going to be talking about Push 2 and everything you need to know to get started using this magnificent device. Today we're going to talk about the Push 2 and everything you need to know about how to get started, its main features, where everything is, and the biggest key points to help you, whether you're a music producer, a songwriter, a musician, or you want to use this thing for live performance. We're going to cover it all. Hey yo, it's Alex from Metronome Music, and with this channel, it's my mission to help musicians produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. All right, I have to say that this piece of gear is a magic machine, and if this piece of wizardry has caught your attention, I guarantee it will help you advance your musical creativity. And the seamless integration that it has with Ableton Live is unreal. It's almost as if Ableton designed it or something. Wait a second. So in this video, we're going to go over an overview of all the main features and qualities that you'll see on Push 2, as well as just the general questions like what do these buttons do? What does the interface look like? How does it work? And we're going to cover all of that in this video so you can get a better understanding as to what the Push 2 can do and use it to the best of its potential right now. So let's get started. All right, so number one, let's talk about the display. All right, and the display is connected to 4 different modes, which are your device, your mix, your browser, and your clip view. All right, let's quickly talk about each of these modes. All right, so we're gonna start by looking at these 4 menus here, which is device, mix, browse, and clip. And these will show you different information on this screen depending on what mode you're in, okay? And the way that the Push 2 works is that each column represents a different track or a different device depending on what mode you're in. All right, so if we're in our mix mode, each of these buttons correspond to a different track in our sessions. All right, so you'll notice that if I hit a different button, it'll change tracks. So each of these buttons represent a different track in my session, okay? And if we're in the mixer view, then each column is going to have a volume fader that you can control with the knob that's on top of that track. So if I select my drum kit here, I can change the volume here. If I select this track, now this is my bass track. And I can control the volume here. You can also control your sends and a bunch of other fun stuff from the mixer view. All right, the next one is the device view. So if we hit device, you'll notice that this changes. All right, and now depending on what track we have the settings of the device itself instead of the volume. So in this setting, I have all of the parameters that control this drum sound when I've selected my drum kit. So I can increase and change all this stuff. Same thing goes if I select this other track. I can change the parameters of this sound when I have this track selected when I'm in the device mode. Next is the clip mode, and this actually shows you the clip information of whatever track you have selected or whatever clip is activated. So if I go back to my drum beat, you'll notice that in this clip view, we're now looking at my drum beats in MIDI data up here. What's super powerful about this is you can zoom into your clip and you can move around individual MIDI notes or edit your audio clip all within the Push 2's interface. How cool is that? And if we want to nudge it, we can move it around. You can change the length, velocity, all that crazy fun stuff. And then finally, we have the browse menu. And next we have the browse menu, which will actually allow you to browse effects or new instruments that you want to load onto new tracks or on the selected track that you have. So it allows you to dive deeper into Ableton without leaving the controller, right? Because you'll notice that as I move around in this menu, that it's moving around in Ableton and we're previewing different things without having to leave the controller. How awesome is that? All right, next we have these navigational arrows on the right side here. And you'll notice that as I hit these arrows, I can move around session view, which if you've used Ableton before, you'll know that session view is basically like a non-linear way to play around with loops and clips that are looping themselves. And you can play around with them without committing to a structure. Super powerful, super fun. And you can actually navigate around the session view with these arrows. And you'll notice that in Ableton itself, we have this red rectangle that represents where we are looking relative to the push. So if I hit down arrows, you'll notice that I'm not seeing any clips anymore because the rectangle is not surrounding any clips. But if I go back up here, now we're seeing different clips and different tracks. So we can navigate our session with those arrows. So next, if we continue down the right side of all of these buttons on the push, you'll see the repeat button and the accent button. And what those do is when you have an instrument loaded up, so in case you didn't know, you can actually play the instrument of the track you have selected with the 64 pad view, whether it's a drum kit, whether it's a synth, whether it's a bass sound, you can play it from the push, which makes it its own instrument. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. But right now I have my drum sounds loaded up right here on these 16 pads. And I can play them here. And what the repeat button does is actually allows me to press and hold a note or press and hold a sample, and it will repeat the note automatically. And you can actually change the rhythm of those repetitions by changing this highlighted rhythm time value. So right now we're at 16th notes. I could change this to 8th notes. Triplets, quarter notes, 30-second notes. Super easy way to get fat trap hi-hat rhythms. Super fun stuff. The next button we'll look at is what is called the accent button. And if we hit the accent button, what this actually does is remove the velocity variation. So that means you get max, MIDI, velocity, power, 127 max. So that means every time I hit a sample on my drum kit, it will be the maximum velocity value. But with accent button off, now depending on how hard I hit the pads, it will affect the velocity of the MIDI notes. All right, the next button we'll look at is the scale button, and the scale button will only be available on melodic instruments, so basses, synths, but not drum kits. All right, and you'll notice that the layout changed on our push automatically when we changed to a melodic instrument, and we get this kind of cool melodic layout on the push too. And what the scale button does is actually will change what scale we are using with the 64 pad grid. So right now we're in C major because we have C major selected, but we can easily change the scale by simply moving the knobs and moving the selector. So now we're in C Lydian. And now we're in D Phrygian. Another fun thing about the scale features on the Push 2 is you can change the layout. So right now the layout might look a little bit confusing to you, but basically the current layout that we have with a melodic instrument is only showing the notes inside whatever scale we're working with. All right, so we cannot hit a wrong note within the scale. Change that by hitting this button so that the scale you've selected is still lit up, but now you can see the notes that do not fit in the scale, and this will change intuitively as you change the scale on the push. And just a quick tip that when you're in this view, the darker colored buttons represent your root note. So in this case, we're in C major, so all these dark buttons are a C note. Just going up and down an octave, and we can climb up the scale one of two ways. We can start here and move horizontally, or we can start at a root note and move vertically. All right, next let's look at the layout button, which is right beside the scale button. And the layout button will actually change the way you interface with whatever instrument you have selected. So in this case, we still have our bass sound. We have a 64 pad grid to play that bass sound. But if I hit this layout button, you'll notice that it completely changes. And this is what is called a melodic sequencer. So in this mode, you can actually pencil in specific notes to play and sequence through time instead of playing them in manually. If I hit layout again, you'll notice that it changed once again modes. And this is kind of a split between sequencing and the full 64 pad grid layout. The bottom 34 pads are still your instrument. So you can choose what note, but then per note, you can sequence them inside a sequencer and pencil in your notes that way. And then you just hit this button again to go back to the full 64 pad layout. I'm gonna hop over back to our drum kit real quick because the layout functions are slightly different when we're talking about drums. So in the default mode for a drum rack or drum kit, you're gonna have your drum kit samples on the bottom 16 pads here that you can play. And the other 16 on the bottom quarter of the Push 2 represent a loop selector. So each of these squares represent a different loop within this clip. So if I double tap on one part, you'll notice that it's selected a specific range of our clip in the clip view. But if I select the second loop in our loop selector, you'll notice that the selection moved over to the second bar of our clip. And you can also select a range by holding a loop and then hitting the second range that you want selected. And you'll notice that it's selected the first 4 bars of my clip. And you can go all the way to 16 bars. And you can zero in on any single part of your clip by double clicking or selecting a range of loops anywhere in your clip. And then finally in this view, the top 32 pads of the Push 2 become a sequencer where you can select a sample. So let's say your kick drum, and you'll notice that there are kick samples placed throughout a timeline that have been sequenced in with this clip. So if I hit play, you'll notice that every time a red pad is hit, it represents the kick drum. And I could insert another kick drum if I wanted by selecting the kick and putting in another kick drum. And you can do this with any single sample in your drum kit, and it will pop up on your screen to represent whatever clip you're in. All right, so when you have a drum kit selected and you hit the layout button, you'll notice that it will change modes. And in this mode, everything stays the same except the bottom right 16 pads. Instead of representing loops of your clip, these actually represent different velocity values. So for example, if I hit my kick drum and I hit one of these pads, it will represent a different velocity. So this is maximum velocity. And then if I go down here, it's a minimum velocity. Right? And they get progressively louder as we move up. And the power of this is you could select a sample, you could select a velocity, and then pencil in and sequence in notes of that velocity into your sequencer. And then let's say you wanted a higher velocity, you could select a higher velocity, pencil those in, put in some ghost notes. Super versatile. If you hit layout once again, you come into 64 drum pads mode. 64 pad mode, you can have drum kits that have 64 pads or use them creatively like this default Ableton 64 pad instrument where every sample on this pad is emulating a snare drum. And the power of this mode is you can upload any sample to any of these pads, whether it's like a vocal sample, a kick drum, a snare, and customize it to your liking for live performance or to pencil in your own instruments, whatever it is. All right, next let's talk about the note view versus the session view. And these two buttons are very important with the Push 2 because in note view, whenever you select a track, it's going to show you the notes of the instrument that you've selected. But in session view, now you're looking at the session view in Ableton. So if we flip back over here, this is what session view represents. And you can see that all the clips that we have selected are represented on the Push. But if we go to note view, now whatever track we have selected, which we can change by hitting these buttons once again, whatever instrument we've selected now, the notes are represented on the pad. All right, so the power of this session view is that you can actually launch clips, you can stop clips, you can record clips, you can duplicate clips, you can launch scenes, and we're gonna get into all of that right now. Right now, I only have one drum loop playing right here. So if I hit this pad, I'll be playing this drum loop. All right, now I'm gonna add in the bass line by hitting this clip. 2, 3, 4. right? So you can start and stop loops simply by hitting the clip that you want to start. And then to stop a clip, you just hit anywhere else. So let's stop the drums. All right, let's stop the bass line. Great thing that you can do with Session View is our rhythm time values here turn into scene launchers. And what a scene is basically launching multiple clips that are beside each other at the same time. So if I hit this, it'll launch every clip on this row from Ableton. All right, awesome. So we've covered most of the main features that you'll see on the right side of the push. Now let's move to the left side of the push. And at the top, you'll see a tempo and a metronome button. And what's amazing of this is you can turn on and off the metronome. So let's play this clip. If we hit the metronome button, it'll turn on the metronome. And then beside the metronome, we're gonna hit it again to turn it off. Beside the metronome, we have a tap tempo button, which we can tap to change the tempo of our session, or we can use the encoder on top of the tap tempo button to change the tempo of our whole session in real time. All right, next let's talk about some of the functions that you can perform directly from Push 2. And we have a delete button, we have an undo button, we have mute, solo, stop clip. And all of these buttons can be used with clips in Session View or clips that you're recording in real time. It's super handy. So for example, with delete, we could go back to our Session View by hitting the session button here, and then we can hold delete, and then we can delete a clip by just simply touching on these clips. But let's say you did a mistake, you could just hit the undo button to redo whatever you just performed. You can mute a track by holding mute and then selecting that track. Continuing down the left side, we also have the double loop button. So if you're working with a loop, for example, let's go into clip view, let's go into note mode, and you want to double the loop you're working with, simply hit double loop and it will duplicate your loop. So next is the Quantize button, which will allow you to quantize your performance to a grid after you performed it to tighten it up. And I'll show you that in just a second as we roll through these final controls. This is the fixed length button, which is super handy if you're recording loops live or if you want to stop recording at a predetermined length of time. And when it's flashing on and off, it means it's on. If you hit this button again, that means it will keep recording until you hit stop record. And if you press and hold fixed length, you'll be able to change the length of how long you're recording. So let's press and hold it. And then we can select 2 bars, 4 bars, 1 bar. Let's stick with 2 bars. And now that it's flashing, we know that it will be recording for 2 bars only. Next is automate button. And this basically means that any changes you do to parameters of a sound over time, if this automate button is on, they will be recorded while you're recording. But if the automate button is off, then any changes you make to your sounds while you're recording will not be automated. All right, they will just stay to the last point that you left them. And then finally, we have the record button and the play button. And those are pretty self-explanatory. If you want to play whatever is selected in your session view right now, just simply hit play. To stop, just hit play again. And let's say we wanted to record a new clip with our drum beat. All you do is hit the record. And just like that, we created a loop. And then let's say we wanted to quantize this loop. You could simply hit quantize, or you could hold quantize and bring up your quantize options. So let's hold quantize. You'll notice these options pop up. So we can quantize to different note values. We can change the swing of the quantize. We can change the quantize amount. So let's turn down the quantize amount. 70%. Let's add some swing and quantize it to 16th notes and then hit quantize. And then you'll notice that all of our MIDI notes moved closer to the grid. And I skipped over this duplicate button, but the duplicate button basically, if you go back to session view and you hold duplicate, you can duplicate a whole row of scenes, right? So I just duplicated this row to this row, or you can hold duplicate, you can select a clip and then pencil in a bunch of duplicates, right? And then again, if you want to delete them, hold delete and just delete the clips. And then finally, let's talk about the add track and add device buttons, which are super important and super crucial. All right, so if we want to add a new track, whether it's an audio track or a MIDI track, just simply hit the add track button and it will prompt you and ask you what kind of track you want to create. And then simply just turn the encoders over the menu that you're selecting to make the selection. So let's select a MIDI track. And you can browse through what kind of device you want to load onto your track. And you can turn on the preview on or off by hitting this preview on or off button as you're browsing through all of your instruments. So once you've found a device that you want to load onto a new track, simply hit load, and just like magic, you've created a new track with this instrument on it. So if you go back to note mode, you'll have this instrument that you can play with. And on top of the add track button, you can also add devices to the selected track by simply hitting add device. So let's say we wanted to add some delay on this piano sound. Let's simply hit the add device button. And then it brings up the browser once again. And now let's browse and find a delay sound. And then once you've found a delay or an effect you want to add, simply hit load once again. And now we've loaded a delay on top of the instrument that we just loaded. And hey, if you're just getting started with music production and feeling completely overwhelmed or having trouble finishing projects, or just like to get a glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that'll help you go from your very first ideas to a finished master. And it's super handy as a printout around the studio, and it will help you finish those projects. So if you're interested, you can grab that in the link below. And that wraps it up for this video. So let me know, do you have a Push 2? Is it part of your workflow? Is it something that you're thinking about getting? Do you think it's worth it? Do you think it's game changing? I'd love to know your opinion. So leave a comment down below, like and subscribe if you found value in this video, and we'll see you in the next one.